So we're nearly at the end of this incredible letter from Paul to this young church in Philippi. And we've only got one more week to go, and I'm really pleased that Paul Chung will be sharing a message next week as we wrap up this letter to the church in Philippi. So as we come to the final few paragraphs of this letter, what is Paul communicating from prison to this young church? Well, the first thing he deals with at the beginning of chapter 4 is a broken relationship. A broken relationship between two women, Odia and Syntyche. Paul has obviously heard through the gossip channels, there's always gossip channels, even back then, that these two great leaders within this church, these two women who had impacted the life of others for the sake of the gospel, have fallen out. Now, here's the big news. Yes, people in church fall out. It happens. The church is not perfect. If you're looking for the perfect church, you won't find it. Relationships break down in life, and they also break down within the church. Something within this relationship has gone on. Something's gone wrong, and there is tension. And Paul points it out big time. Because back in those days, these letters would have been read out to the whole church. This breakdown in relationship was public. So imagine you are Odia and you head out to this meeting, you've heard that Paul has written this letter and they're about to read it out. And then you hear those lines right at the beginning of chapter 4. Obviously, they didn't call it chapter 4 then, they just read it as a whole letter, but we know it as chapter 4. And you hear your name being mentioned. Oh no, Paul has found out. And we've got to sort it out. We've got to sort this broken relationship out. Paul's message to them and to us today is sort it out and sort it out quickly. He says, agree with each other. Find a way to forgive one another. And his message to the church is help these women. Help them find a way. Help them find a way to forgive and to be, and here's a big word, reconciled. To forgive and to be reconciled. Then Paul moves on to say this in verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. For us, the word rejoice sounds as though Paul is calling us to be happy, to be joyful. Isn't there a song, everything is awesome, everything is happy, it's all that kind of Legoland kind of feel to it, to be happy. But back then, they would have translated this word to mean public celebration. Paul is saying, celebrate. Put on a party and go crazy because of what Jesus has done for all of us. I mean, all the other faiths at that time, those that worshipped other gods and goddesses, had loads of festivals, they had loads of parties. So why shouldn't the church, the Christian church, those that follow Jesus, put on a party and celebrate big time? Put on a public celebration, rejoice. Throughout these past 4 months, it's been hard to rejoice, to celebrate. Beth always reminds me and Helen that once the virus has gone, we need to book a bouncy castle. I think Beth just wants to go on a bouncy castle, but she wants to put on a party for the church and for the local estate. And once the right time comes when we can do that, I really think as a church we should put on a party, link up with some other local businesses and organisations, say let's celebrate. But the time obviously is not right now. One day we might be able to celebrate and get that bouncy castle. Paul's message is clear. Celebrate all who God is and what he has done for us. And this is coming from a guy who's in prison. It just goes to show that our inner attitudes do not need to reflect our outward circumstances, our outward reality. But how are we to celebrate when the pressure is on? When we are consumed with anxiety and also we're fearful about the future? Anxiety and fear are real. I don't want to minimize those things because there have been times in my life when I've been anxious and fearful. And in those times it can consume us from the inside out. And it's hard. It's hard just to move on. People say, just move on. But I know that it's difficult. It's hard. It takes time. As we emerge from lockdown, we also know that we are now entering what people have called the recovery phase. And the headline for this particular phase is that we are to expect a tsunami of anxiety. A tsunami of anxiety. We live in anxious times. Will there be a second wave? Will we, like Leicester, have to go back into some sort of harder lockdown? What will the economic impact of this be for the next few years, for a generation? How will these past 4 months impact our children and their long-term education? And these are real questions that we need to engage with, to listen to, and to consider. But in the midst of all of this is good news. The consistent message that is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And that message is that we can find and we can know freedom and peace in Jesus Christ. And Paul knew that freedom. He knew it. Hence he could challenge the young church back then with all their issues, with all their anxiety, and to challenge us today with these words. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. I've been in situations before when I can't sleep because my mind is racing through all sorts of scenarios when I'm dealing with something or feel under pressure about something in life. On countless occasions, the last thing I do is turn to prayer. I know, surely the vicar should know better, and I probably should. The last thing I do is turn to prayer. I looked at all sorts of other things. I try and sort it out myself. I try and do all kinds of things. And the last thing I do is turn to prayer. Sometimes I forget, and we forget, that we follow and believe in a God who is in control, who came into the mess of the world and died for us on a cross. But not just die for us in our place, but he raised to life again. The resurrection power. We forget about the resurrection power. When you feel anxious, turn to prayer. It should be the first thing that we do. It doesn't matter how big or small the issue is. We need to pray. We need to put our hands into his hands. And just because we pray it doesn't necessarily mean that all the suffering, all the pain will instantly go away. I don't think it works like that. But what the Bible teaches us, and what our experiences show us, is that when we put our trust in him, when we lift our eyes from ourselves and towards him, we are filled with his peace. A deep, deep peace that says, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Our hope, whatever the circumstances, is found in Jesus. He is the hope of the world. And I really think the world, the UK, our families, our friends, our neighbours, our estate, our church, needs to hear the message of hope once again. The message of Jesus. The gospel that impacts every single life on this world. We need to hear the message of hope again. So just to recap, we need to forgive quickly. If there's a breakdown in relationship that you know of in your own life, how can you show and reflect Jesus in that? How can you turn to forgiveness and bring reconciliation? How can others help you do that? We need to ask for help sometimes. And when I feel anxious and the anxiety building up within us, we need to turn to prayer. And as we do, I really believe that you will know his deep peace. His deep, deep peace that says, it's going to be okay.